Hello viewers, so today I'm going to look at the UGREEN M.2 NVMe hard drive enclosure. But despite the name, it's not actually a hard drive enclosure, it's an SSD enclosure. This is a very useful SSD enclosure. It uses USB 3.2 Gen 2x1 connectivity, which is ubiquitous, and it allows you to reuse an SSD that you may already have lying around. It's inexpensive, and one use case would be, suppose your PC's broken and you want to get the contents of the SSD off the SSD. No problem. Take the SSD out the computer, put it in the enclosure, and then you can read it on another PC. So USB 3.2 Gen 2x1 gives you 10 gigabits per second. Now in terms of file sizes, that is around about real-world transfer rate of perhaps 850 to 1000 megabytes per second, remembering that there's 8 bits in a byte. That's very respectable transfer rate. Now it's nowhere near as fast as your internal SSD, but for many applications that doesn't matter. It's likely to be substantially faster than the little thumb drives you buy. The UGREEN M.2 NVMe hard drive enclosure comes in this box. Let's put this the right way around, and with a little bit of luck the camera will focus on it. So that's the packaging. I've already extracted the contents. Despite the name, this is not an enclosure for hard drives, it's an enclosure for M.2 NVMe SSDs. The enclosure is made in aluminum if you're in the US, and it looks like this. You'll notice that it has a protector around it which looks like it's a silicone protector, so if you drop it, it's protected. I'm not going to drop it to demonstrate though. At the end of the enclosure we have a USB 3.2 Gen 2x1 interface. That's there. Some people just call it USB-C. I think I can see why. That interface is good for 10 gigabits per second. In the box we also find a USB 3.2 Gen 2x1 cable. That's this. And at this point I have to say I think that Thunderbolt naming is so much better than USB. You simply have Thunderbolt 1, Thunderbolt 2 up to currently Thunderbolt 5. USB naming is a mess. Right, with that said, let's get on to the other things that are in the box. Also in the box we have a thermal pad. That's the thermal pad in its wrapper. The thermal pad will bridge the gap between the SSD and the aluminium casing, allowing the heat to dissipate into the casing. That's precisely what you want. In the box we also have some pieces of documentation. We have a user guide. This. But it's not a user guide. It's the compliance information for various regions. Also in the box we have another document, this one. This one is actually the setup instructions, and it's this one that you would want to pay attention to. Finally we have a little piece of paper, this piece of paper, and that tells you how to recycle it. To open it you simply push on the end that does not have that, so you push on the other end and it pops out, and then you can pull it out, and if I turn it the right way round you can see that the SSD goes in there. I'm now going to reposition my camera so I can show you how to get an SSD in and set it up to use. The next thing to do is to put an SSD into the enclosure. The first thing we need to do is to open the enclosure, so let's do that. To open the enclosure you need to push the end opposite the end with the USB port. The USB port is here, so that means we need to push this end. So if I push this end, it pops out. And then if I pull it out, you can see we're now ready to install the SSD. The next thing we need to do is to remove the rubber stop. In the user manual this is described as a screw, but I think rubber stop's a better description. That's this bit here, so we simply pull that out fairly hard. And this That bit is the bit that will hold the SSD in place. The next thing we need to do is to attach that rubber stop to the end of the SSD. That's where you would normally use a small screw to hold the SSD down onto a computer mainboard, for example. So to do that, we take our SSD. This SSD is actually out of my old AMD Threadripper computer. Now, I'm going to put this in like this. Let's try and do that so you can see it. That's going to go in there. Now you can see the rubber stop is installed, and all we need to do now is to put the SSD into the enclosure. If you look carefully, there's only one way this can go in, which is with the label up. So I'm going to try and do that so you can see it. Let's try it that way. We push that in. Then I just need to push the rubber stop down hard, and it's done. If you're planning to actually use this as an external SSD long term, you should attach the thermal pad, but I'm not planning to do that, so I'm not going to. In fact, the only reason I'm doing this is I want to reformat this SSD. And then it's simply a matter of sliding back into the case. And you get a little click and it's done. The final step is to connect the SSD to a host. But to do that, I need to stop recording because I want to capture that on a screen recording. I'm now going to test the enclosure with the SSD in it on my Beelink SER8, that's an AMD 8745 based mini PC, and it's running Windows 11. First thing to do is to get rid of the screen by going cancel. Obviously, I don't want to import the boot disk from my old computer. Let's open File Explorer and see if we can see it. It looks promising so far. Now, the mini PC has two internal SSDs which are labelled C and D. So I'm looking for E, and you can see I have E, and you can see it looks like a Windows drive because it has Windows on it and it has Vulkan SDK and goodness knows what else. So that works. I'm now going to run the Blackmagic Disk Speed Test. Blackmagic Disk Speed Test is part of the Blackmagic desktop video suite, and that's a free download from Blackmagic. You'll be able to find that easily on Google or just by going direct to the Blackmagic website. I'm going to switch my keyboard so it's operating the mini PC, and then I'm going to search for it. Now, the first thing I need to do is to change the target drive. I'm going to change the target drive to E, obviously, and I'm going to do it in the temp folder. So let's go E, temp, select folder. Now I can run the test. You can see that for both read performance and write performance, I'm getting between 800 and 900 megabytes per second. So I'm now going to eject it, and then I'm going to test it on Mac. Now, it is possible to fit a drive that has a heatsink, but you won't be able to shut the enclosure. I'll show you what I mean. So you can see it slots in, obviously it won't push down. If all you want to do is to retrieve the data from this, or reformat it, or both, then this works fine. I'm now going to connect the enclosure to my MacBook Pro. So I'm now capturing the screen of my MacBook Pro, and I'm just going to double click on the untitled drive, and that will open it in Finder, and we can just check that it's there. So you can see it's definitely there. I've opened Disk Utility, and you can see the disks on the system, and the external one is labelled as disk 4S2. What this means is that I can reformat this on my Mac. I could also obviously reformat it on my mini PC. That's one reason I'm very keen on this enclosure, because you might have thought that it would not work with an SSD with a heatsink, but it works fine providing you can plug the connector on the M.2 NVMe SSD into the enclosure, and with most heatsinks you should be able to. What you won't be able to do, of course, is to shut up and use it, but for data recovery this is going to work fine, or for repurposing the disk by reformatting it, it's going to work fine. I'm going to pause it there a moment and see if I can connect this to my UGREEN NAS, which is in the other room. Right, I've now connected the SSD enclosure to my NAS. That's a UGREEN NASync DXP6800 Pro. So I'm now just going to look on the UGREEN NAS, which I've got open in a Safari window, and we'll see if we can see it. And we can. It's listed as external device. So that's promising. Whether we can read it's another matter. And you can see I can read it on the UGREEN NAS. So the UGREEN NAS runs the UGOS operating system, and UGREEN developed that operating system on Debian as the core. So that shows that it should work on Linux as well. One other thing I want to do is to test the performance on Mac. I'm going to run a Blackmagic Disk Speed Test on the Mac now, so let's try that. I think this won't work because the volume is formatted to NTFS, so it will be read-only, but let's try it. So I'm selecting target drive, untitled 0010.2, and you can see from the error message that we can't do that. What we can do though is to go into Disk Manager and reformat it. So let's do that. I keep saying Disk Manager, it's Disk Utility. I'm opening Disk Utility and I'm going to erase it and format it with the Apple file system. There's the disk. We're going to go erase. I'm calling it Samsung-2TB and I'm going to format it with the Apple file system. I've selected the target drive. I'm going to hit start. The performance looks fine. We're getting over 900 megabytes per second for write and a bit over 700 megabytes per second for read. I'm not sure why the read performance is slower, but anyway, this is perfectly usable given it's USB 3.2 Gen 2x1. Overall, I think this is a very good, inexpensive SSD enclosure. Has a number of uses and it's definitely something that I want to have in my toolbox. The particular highlight for me is the recovery highlight in terms of recovering SSDs from computers that are no longer working, because it's an incredibly inexpensive way of accessing the data on those SSDs. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, please click on the like and subscribe buttons. Have a fantastic day.